Recording in progress.
Today we're going to be learning Masachet Nedarim Daf Nun Tet. We're going to start with a quick review of where we started. So if you remember, we started with this question of Yishmael. Okay, Yishmael Ish Prayama or Deyama, and he asked the following question about whether an onion that you took out in the Shmita and it had sanctity and you planted it again and then it grew in the 8th year, would what grew nullify the sanctity that was in the fruits, in the vegetables that were planted? We brought all sorts of answers, and we ended up saying yesterday that certainly when it comes to Shemitah, there was a reason to say at the end, maybe only Shemitah, but hold off on that for a minute. But when it comes for sure to Shemitah, we saw the source about the Motzei Shvi. If the Yisrael is chashul ala shvi'it, then Motzei Shvi, when you're eating it, it's mutav. And then we said from there, you can infer that things that grow in the 8th year can cancel out the 7th year. And, you don't have to worry that maybe it had things from this person who didn't really keep Shemitah properly. You don't have to worry about that. And then we said, then the Gemara said, well, maybe that's only Shemitah and not other things. So our Gemara is now going to ask a question, possibly on that, disregarding the answer that the Gemara gave, that maybe that's only for Shemitah. So remember, the Gemara said maybe this raises a question then to those who said, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan, who were quoted before, is saying, doesn't the Gidulim don't override? And then they said, maybe we can distinguish those cases, Orlan Kilea Kerem, are unique, are different than Shemitah, and Shemitah grows from the ground. And because the whole prohibition comes to the ground, specifically because of that, it goes by the 8th year. Okay, but possibly we're now saying, forget that. Let's go back to the basic source there, which did seem to indicate the Gidulim override. Or possibly, and I brought this at the top of the sheet, it goes all the way back to Rabbi Yochanan at the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Bet, who had said, an onion of truma that's planted, and then it grows, right, more than 100 times the original truma, it's nullified. So either which way, it's a question on someone earlier or something that said that what grows can nullify what was the basics, right? The original, the one that caused it all to grow, the ikar. So now comes Rami bar Hama in the second line of today's daf. Mativ Rami bar Hama with the following source. And finally, we get back to our Mishna. Right? We got off on this long tangent, which we figured it had something to do with the Gidulim, but still it wasn't really directly related to our sugya. So here comes his question. He says, you want to say that the Gidulim override the original, right? The part that was planted. But I'm going to show you not, because in our Mishnah, what does it say? Konam perot elu alai, konam him alpi, konam him lipi. If you say these fruits are going to be forbidden to my mouth, asur b'chilufeihen u'b'giduleihen. And what do you see? The original fruit is now planted, and it grows and grows and grows. And even though it's no longer really the original plant, and theoretically what grew would override it, but it doesn't. You see, nullification doesn't work here. The Gidulim don't nullify the original. Okay, they quote more of the Mishnah, even though you don't really need any more, which is Shani Ochel, Shani To'em. Say it in that language, Mutar b'chilufeihen b'gidulehen, then they're permitted. And then, this is the more important part, is Davar shezaro kale. This is all if it disintegrates. Aval b'davar she'ein zaro kale, afilu gidulei gidulin asurim. But if the original is still intact, and that's exactly what we've been talking about, then even the Gidulim of the Gidulim are forbidden, right? Even once it's so far removed. Now, theoretically, you should say laws of nullification should apply. So Rabbi Abba comes to answer this question and says, Shane konamot ho'il v'ibai mitchal alayu. And therefore, what does he say? Konamot are different. Konamot are vows. Vows can be undone. And therefore, they're considered a davar she'en lo mitirim. Sheyesh lo mitirim. Something that eventually, we talked about this a bunch in the last few dapim, something that can be undone. It will be permitted at some point. Theoretically, you can undo your vow, and then the whole thing will be permitted. Because it can eventually be permitted, we don't allow it to be nullified. And that's why the Gidulim don't nullify the original. And therefore, this is not a question. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Truma, but wait, you're saying any davar sheyesh lo mitirim that will eventually be permitted is not nullified berov, and you're defining yesh lo matirin differently than we've defined it until now, which is you can undo it if you wanted. Well, in that case, hare truma also. Di'bai mitchavale ubadle berov. Truma, you can also undo. What does it mean you can undo truma? Interesting, right? We never really talked about this. Well, if I separate truma to give to a kohen, and then I decide, you know what? I don't want those fruits to go to the kohen. I want to give him different ones. I can go to a chacham and undo. Okay, the question, how exactly you do this, and where it talks about, not for today, but I can theoretically undo my choice of which fruits I wanted to give to the kohen. I could give him other ones. So if that's the case, truma is also davar sheyesh lo matirin, and if you're trying to say that's what defines something as a davar sheyesh lo matirin, and that's why the neder, the gidulim, don't nullify, but truma we know does get nullified, even though theoretically it's davar sheyesh lo matirin. How do we know that? It's batle berov. Now it's not really batle berov. Rov usually means 51%. Here it means 100 to 1. Okay, it's batel if you have 100 against the truma. How do we know this? Ditnan, it says in the Mishna. Se'ah truma, you have a se'ah, that's a measurement of truma. Tme'ah, impure truma. Shenafla lepachot mimeh chulin. It falls into less than 100 of chulin. So now you have a problem because it's not batel in less than 100. Truma needs 100 against it. Terakev, it has to be left to Rab. But halemea, but it sounds like if it fell into 100 chulin, tale. And what would we say? If it's davar sheyesh lo matirin, it shouldn't, even in 100, it shouldn't be nullified. To which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara is now going to give 3 answers why this doesn't contradict our answer. We're going to be left with our original answer. Nedarim are different because they're davar sheyesh lo matirin. What about this truma case? So we're going to have 3 different answers. The first 2 are going to be rejected. First, they suggest that maybe the case is, Amre betruma biyad kohen askina delo matzimit shalala. When can the truma be she'elad, that you could undo it by going to a chacham? When can you do that? You can do that as long as you haven't given it to the kohen yet, when it's still in the hands of the Yisrael who separated the truma. So you could say that our Mishna was already when the truma got into the hands of the kohen and it became impure, and then it fell into this pile of less than 100. And if it fell into 100, it would actually be nullified because at this point, you can't undo it anymore. You can't undo it once you give it to the Kohen. The Kohen for sure can't undo it. So to which the Gemara says, can't possibly be that's the case. Look at the end of that source. It says if the truma is pure and didn't become impure and it fell into this pile of chulin, you now have one truma mixed in with 100 chulin, or less than 100 chulin, right? So instead of leaving it to rot, what can you do? Timacher lekohen. Sell the whole thing to a kohen, because you're now left with a mixture of truma and non-truma, and you don't know what's what. So you can't eat any of it, so sell the whole thing to a kohen. A kohen can eat it all. What's the difference? Kohen can eat truma. So now, obviously then, it's not when the truma is in the hands of the kohen already, if they're giving you the solution of sell it to a kohen. So option number 2. Let's come up with a case where we need to find someone who is selling it to a kohen. So let's assume it's a Yisrael, but it's not the Yisrael who took the truma. And then, right, it's a Yisrael who has the truma after it was given to the kohen, which again would then put it in the category where it's no longer a davar sheyesh lo matirin because no one can undo it anymore. How could that possibly be? Well, what if I'm a Yisrael and my mother was the daughter of a Kohen, or actually I could use myself as a better example. My father's a Kohen. So my father passed on food to my son. Now my son is a Yisrael because I married a non-Kohen, but he inherited truma. Okay, this would be an inheritance case they're talking about. So he got the truma through inheritance. And now he owns it, right? But he can't eat it because the truma he owned, which he was going to probably give to a kohen or something. But again, he's not giving it as truma. He's giving it not as his giving of a gift to a kohen of truma, right? Or he can sell it to a kohen if you want. It's worth money for him. So he is not a person who can undo it because it was truma already and it was given to his grandfather as truma. He just inherited it. So now they tell him, well, if it's tahol, then just sell your entire pile to a Kohen. So that works. Well, what's the problem? Now, there's another, right? This is a better way to say it, where it's not a davar sheish lo matirim, and we've managed to say it also wasn't in the hands of the Kohen, which made sense with that line, sell it to a Kohen. But now they say, but it also doesn't match the wording of the Mishnah. Haktane seifa, timacher lekohen chutz midemeo taseah. You can sell this whole pile to a Kohen other than the se'ah that's truma. Why? Because now, if it were the grandson, he'd be allowed to sell the entire thing because he owns that truma. That truma was his. He gained it in inheritance. He could sell the entire thing. Obviously, we're talking about someone like, let's say me. I took truma to masrot for my crops, then, which theoretically doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to a Kohen, but I haven't given it to a Kohen yet. It falls now into a pile of chulin. Now I can sell the entire thing to a Kohen, but I can't sell the entire thing. I sell the entire thing, but I have to deduct the amount of one se'ah because one se'ah didn't belong to me. One se'ah was supposed to go to the Kohen, which means it has to be that it was in my possession. And it has to be from before I gave it to the Kohen. We can't answer that it was a Kohen's already. We can't answer that it was the Kohen's that he gave it to his Yisrael grandson, because none of those seem to fit with the case of the Mishnah. So we're back to square one. This seems to be a davar sheish lo matirim, because if it's still in my hands before I've given it to a Kohen, I could theoretically undo it. To which they say, Ela ema bishlama, they're now going to give a different type answer. Those were what we call ukimto, trying to say the case of the Mishnah was this particular case. Now we're going to say, no, the case of the Mishnah was truma, and we're comparing it to neder. It's not the same thing. The undoing of a vow and the undoing of truma is very different. And in terms of davar sheish lo matirim, it's going to make all the difference. Why? Ela ema bishlama konamot mitzvah litshule alehen mishum de Rabbanit. And neder, it's a mitzvah. It's something we want to encourage you to undo your vows. We don't like when you have vows on you. As we know, Rabbi Natan said, Dama Rabbi Natan, kol hanodel, we've seen this before, ke'ilu bana bama. Anyone who takes a vow is like building a bama, a temple outside, right? A place to sacrifice outside the temple, which is frowned upon by God. V'hamakaimo, and if you keep your vow, ke'ilu maktir alea korbanot, right? It's as if you, I assume the word korbanot is missing here. No, actually maktir alea. It's as if you're sacrificing on it. So now, we're basically saying a neder is a bad thing, and that's why it's a davar sheish lo matirim, because we want you lahatir, as opposed to truma. Aval truma, my mitzvah litshule ala, but truma, there's no mitzvah to undo your truma, right? It's definitely not a good thing. I don't know if it's frowned upon, but it's definitely not encouraged. So therefore, that's why truma will not be called a davar sheish lo matirim, but nedarim will, and that resolved our question of Rami bar Hama from our Mishnah against the answer given to, again, one of the possible answers that was saying that the gidulim nullify the original planted part. Gufa. Now we're going to go into another person's opinion that we saw before, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, another source that showed that what grows nullifies the original. So Rabbi Yochanan says, litra b'tzalim shetikna. I had a liter of onions that I took truma masrot from. They were great, right? I did what I was supposed to. Uzra'a, I planted them again. Mitaseret lefi kula. Even though what I planted, I already had taken the tithes, I had to take tithes now from the entire thing. I don't deduct the amount of produce that grew that I had already taken the tithes from. So that seems to imply that what grew nullified what was there originally, because what was there originally wasn't obligated in Maaser anymore. Yativ Raba v'kamar la hashmata. So Raba sat and taught this halacha. Amalei Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said to him, Man sai achu Rabbi Yochanan Rabba. Who's going to listen to you and Rabbi Yochanan, your rabbi? What kind of a crazy thing did you just say? Heter shabahen leichan alach. Where did the heter, where'd it go? In other words, you planted onions. Those onions you already took maaser from. You definitely don't need to take maaser again from them. How could it just disappear like that? Doesn't believe in this nullification. Amarle, to which Raba answers, Rav Chisda, I'll tell you. Milo tznan de kavate, doesn't it have a Mishnah like me? Here's a Mishnah. Bitzalim she'ardu alehem gshamim. If you have onions where it rained upon them, right? So they were onions of the 6th year, and it rained upon them in the 7th year. Im hayu alim shalahem shchorim. If the leaves were dark, remember this we saw yesterday, asurim, it's going to be forbidden because it mainly, right, it's showing this is mainly 7th year produce. Horiku, but if they're light green, mutarim, then they're considered more 6th year produce and they'll be permitted. V'chish chorim amay asurim. Now, if you planted them in the 6th year, they obviously grew somewhat in the 6th year. And then in the 7th year, right, and now the leaves are dark green, we're going to attribute it to the 7th year. Well, this is no different than your Masir case. We should say, what happened to the 6th year produce that was permitted? At least part of this shouldn't have the sanctity of the Shemitah year on it. So, Amar Le, Rav Chisda says to him, this is not a good proof. Mi safart al ikar katane? Who says that this asurin, if the leaves are dark, the whole thing is forbidden? No, including what was planted originally. Atosefet katane asurin. When they say asurin, what they mean is, the Mishna means, only what grew in the 7th year is forbidden. Now, how exactly you split this is a good question, but theoretically, what it's saying is, really not the whole thing is forbidden. The heter of the one part that grew in the 6th year is actually fine. It's not, doesn't have sanctity to it. Only the extra is forbidden. To which Rav Chisda is basically saying, this Mishnah not only doesn't prove your point, Raba, but it actually goes against what you're trying to say, because this shows the ikar still is there, and it doesn't, what grows does not nullify the original. To which the Gemara asks, or Raba asks against him, if you think that it's talking about the extra, what grew in the 7th year and not what was planted in the 6th year, well then what's Rashbag coming to say? Now, without looking inside, you would assume Rashbag must appear in that Mishnah is arguing, and they're going to quote Rashbag now. But in fact, Rashbag doesn't appear in that Mishnah. Rashbag actually appears elsewhere in a Braita, quoting a Braita. Some people explain, the main way of understanding this, is that Braita was relating to our Mishnah, and the assumption is that Rashbag must be disagreeing with the Tana of the Mishnah. Some people actually say, I think it's the Rush, that the Rashbag is talking about something entirely different, but it's the same idea, and you can apply that here. Anyway, let's just go with Rashbag was actually commenting on our Mishnah. Ditan, it says in a Braita, Rashbag omer, hagadel b'chiyuv chayav, hagadel b'patur patur. If it was grown in the time where one is obligated, then one is obligated. If it grows in the time where one is exempt, the part that grew in the time when it was exempt is exempt. Now, chiyuv and patur don't really match asur and mutal of Shemitah year, right? Whether it's kedushat shvi'it and it's forbidden, or it's not kedushat shvi'it and it's permitted. And that's part of the reason why the Rush is motivated to say this is talking about something else, a different machloket. But let's just stick with assuming it really means the same. What Rashbag says is, and seems to be disagreeing with the Tana of the Mishnah, is saying whatever grew in the 7th year is treated as 7th year, what grew in the 6th year is treated as 6th year, which seems to say that and that's basically Ikar and Tosefet. And that goes against what the Tana of the Mishnah said, which means the Tana of the Mishnah doesn't think it's only talking about the Tosefet, which brings us back to Raba as saying, look, according to the Tana of the Mishnah, it all is nullified, and it all goes by 7th year if the leaves are dark green, or 6th year if the leaves are light green, and one can nullify the other, really. So now, right, really the idea is that the Yasurim, the 7th year nullifies the heter of the 6th year, and it disappears, which is exactly what Rav Chisda's question was on Rabbi, how could you just say the heter disappears? And here he says it says in the Mishnah. To which Rav Chisda answers, no. Tana kamanami hachi amar. Kulamanita Ramshaman Gamliel katanela. Tana of the Mishnah actually held exactly like Rashbag. He held that same thing. What Rashbag was coming to do is to explain the Tana of the Mishnah. And therefore comes Rav Chisda, with the winning answer and says, you can't prove it from this Mishnah, because this Mishnah is Rashbag, and the Mishnah is only talking about the extra, which then could theoretically lead one to say, it clearly doesn't, right? That it doesn't nullify. And that goes against what Rabbi Yochanan said, that Raba quoted Rabbi Yochanan is saying. To which, now there's, again, a bit of a debate in the Gemara, in the commentaries about what this next line is coming to do. But let's just explain it that Raba, we'll explain this the way that I thought was the most simple and most obvious, is Raba is coming to now say, no, you're still not right. Okay, I'm going to support my claim. You want to say, and assuming that we take it one step farther, it's not just that you're wrong, this doesn't prove your point, Rav Chisda said to him, but because it's talking about the Tosefet, but because it's talking about only the Tosefet, it's actually proving the opposite, which is it doesn't nullify. To which he says, it might be that you're right. Let's take your Mishnah at face value, the way you understand it. You think the Mishnah is talking about Rashbag and that it doesn't nullify the original. But that's because I'm going to distinguish between that case and the cases I've been discussing. That Mishnah was a case where, notice, it started with an onion that was in the ground on the 6th year, and it grew in the 7th year. I didn't do anything to that onion. So because I didn't do anything to that onion, now here's the tricky part. Why exactly does this connect? But because I didn't do anything to that onion, that's why what grew from it didn't nullify the original. But in the case that I was talking about, okay, if you look at the study guide will help organize this stuff. It's a little bit of a going all over the place stuff. We have a lot of questions, answers. Rabbi Yochanan had talked about this litra bitzalim, that you took Trumot maschot, then you planted them, and then they grew in the 7th year. So there you actually planted them and you worked for them. Once you are toreach, then we say that you were, now again, a little bit unclear how you connect. Once you put effort into it, then we're going to assume that what grew from it, because it grew from your efforts, can nullify the original. That's the logic. So now they say, so when you do put in that effort, then it will be nullified. So basically, he says, first, Raba brought this Mishna to prove his point. Rav Chisda said this doesn't prove your point. In fact, it proves the exact opposite. To which Raba says, fine, you think it proves the exact opposite? I'm just going to neutralize this Mishnah. I'm going to stick it to the side and say this Mishnah isn't the same as the case we've been talking about, because that Mishnah, you didn't make any effort. This is our Mishnah where you made an effort. Did Katarech Batal Baruba? Wait a minute. Is it true that any time, and let's just talk about this claim that Raba just made. Is it true that when you're toreach, when you put an effort, it's nullified? It gets canceled? Bahare, right, again, that what grew is going to cancel the original. Hare litra ma'aser tevel to katarach. Saw this case yesterday again. You have a litra of ma'aser. You're a Levi. You got ma'aser from your someone. You're supposed to take truma on it to give to the Kohen. You're supposed to take 1/10 of it. You didn't. And then you planted it. Yeah, you planted it. Katarach. You put an effort. Vekatane. And then when it grows the following year, it says, Ota litra ma'aser alav mimakom acher lefi cheshbon. What did we say? It was in the 6th year that you did it. And then it grew in the 7th year. If it grows in the 7th year, you're not chayav ma'aser. But since you didn't take the ma'aser originally, that part is obligated in ma'aser. Now, if the 7th year comes and nullifies, then what will we say? Right? It's a case of katarach. You put effort into it. It should nullify. If it nullifies, you shouldn't be obligated ma'aser because it grew in the 7th year. So what is the answer, Raba? Don't ask me questions from that. Shane gabe ma'aser da'amakra aser ta'aser. Okay, it's a bit of a complicated line. Let's do it part by part. The Torah says aser ta'aser. Aser ta'aser kol tvuat tzaracha. You should take maaser on all the crops that grow from your seeds. Now, what is normally, what do you plant? You plant produce, right? Things that grew, you then replant. Normally, what do you plant? This is the heter zarein ashe. You normally plant heter. What does it mean, heter? You normally plant things that you already took truma maschot on, right? I plant, my onion. My onion, I plant, usually it's because I've already tithed all my produce. And then I take one that's left and I put it in the ground. Now, what happens? When it grows, I take maaser again. We talked about this before. Whatever I took maaser on it before is nullified already. In other words, we don't count that when I planted it, I already took maaser on that. I don't have to take maaser again on that. No, because first of all, they learn it from aser to aser. Aser to aser double language. Take maaser twice. You took maaser on that onion before you planted it. Now you planted it again. You have to take maaser again. So that teaches you what? That when it grows, it's nullified, right? What was originally in the ground, but you put in the ground before, is nullified to what new growth there is. because aser to aser. Now, that's in a normal case. The Torah is speaking about normal cases. What are normal cases? When you take something you do something in the right way, where you took the truma to mascot and then you planted it. But this case is an exception to the rule. What happened in this case that we were bringing to try to disprove this theory? If you work, then it doesn't, right? Then it nullifies. And in this case, it didn't nullify. It was a case where you planted, you were the Levi who didn't take the maser and the truma for the coin, and you planted it before doing that, which means you did it be'isul. Now, the Torah wasn't talking about when you do something that's forbidden. When you do something that's isser, you plant something that you didn't take truma to maskot from, we're not going to let it be nullified. No, you have to take care of the truma from what you planted be'isul. Aser to aser, saying you're going to have to do double maser, right? Which in this case, it's actually tricky because in this case, it actually, normally it's nullified and then you would do the maser double. In this case, you're also taking the maser on the original, but we don't say it's nullified to the 7th year and you should actually be exempt. Because you did it be'isul, it's actually still intact and it doesn't get nullified. So here there's a different exception to the rule here because it was done be'isul. But normal cases of a tircha where you put in some effort to it, it actually will be nullified. So Raba in the end succeeds in using the Mishna to prove, right, that Mishna that we saw before, that he quoted about the onions that the rain fell down on, right? That is a totally different case. There was no effort put in. If there's effort put in, then it actually it's nullified. Other than if you planted something in a forbidden manner, then that wouldn't be part of this aser to aser, where normally it would nullify, but in this case it wouldn't be nullified because you have to still do the truma on what you didn't do before, and therefore it's not nullified. But in normal cases, it would be. That's it for this. So again, what we started with today was a question on those who say that nullification works. We tried to bring this our Mishna to contradict. We distinguished between Nedarim and truma, right? We said Nedarim is davar sheyesh lo matirin. Truma would never count as that because we don't want to motivate people to undo their truma. Then we brought this other statement of Rabbi Yochanan that we had talked about before, which also talked about nullification. Raba quoted it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Chisda says, what are you talking about? You're crazy. How could the heter just disappear through nullification? Raba proves it from this Mishna. Rav Chisda tries to say that Mishna's not saying what you think it is. Only time at the extra, and it's actually proving there is no nullification. And then Raba proves, even if you say there's no nullification, it still is a different case than I was talking about, because there you didn't put in any effort. The rain just came down on it and the onions were there to begin with, as opposed to our case where you put in effort. When you put in effort, it will be nullified. Is that really true that when you put in effort, it will be nullified? Didn't we bring this other source? So that's a unique case because there you hadn't taken the truma that you should have, and it was done in a forbidden manner. And that's why the pasuk, which teaches you that it gets nullified, doesn't kick in, because the pasuk doesn't really relate to things that were done in an improper manner. It really only relates to people who do things in a proper manner. With that, we finished our daf, where the last 3 lines are just a gufa. It's a quote from something we saw already. I'll just read them and we'll start with it tomorrow. Ami Rabbi Chanina Tirta'a, Amar Rabbi Yanai, another source that was quoted, but they're also saying that there's nullification here. But sal shel truma, you planted an onion that was truma. Shenita'o, you planted it. V'rabu gidulav alikoro mutal. And again, if the growth was 100 times more than the original, then it will be nullified. So we'll get to what the Gemara is going to do with this in tomorrow's Shiur. Wishing everyone a great Hanukkah, and we'll meet up tomorrow.